On my last trip to Israel, I made a big mistake. I let my sisters go along. Now, I love my sisters, but you have to understand that one of the things I love about taking groups to Israel is that I get to be scholar in residence for a week. But about 3 or 4 days into this trip, Pam said to me, "These people all gather around you and hang on your every word like you actually know something." Well, Joy and I know better. You're just Paris. You're not fooling us, you know. One day on the bus, people started asking me questions about some of the places we had just seen. And so I got on the microphone, you know, the one the guide uses on the bus, and I waxed eloquent for the group, and I dispensed my vast knowledge of the Bible and history, and the questions were great, and they were firing them back and forth at me, and I was feeling like a real big shot. And then my sister Joy raised her hand. She said, "I have a question." I said, "Yes, please, what's your question?" She said, "Did you put any sunscreen on your old bald head?" Well, the Q&A came to a screeching halt. It's hard to look professorial after something like that, you know. But at least the scripture in today's reading from Mark 6 did become real for me in that moment. Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house. I have real empathy for Jesus as he tried to talk to his hometown crowd. Of course, I got off easy. My sisters were just ragging on me, and that's what we do to each other all the time. Verse 3 of today's reading says, Jesus' family and friends took offense at him. No matter what he said, they wouldn't listen. And it's not hard to see why. I mean, they'd grown up with him. They'd all gone to high school together. In their minds, the hometown boy had gotten too big for his britches. He wasn't going to pull the wool over their eyes. No, sir. So let's call this incident in Jesus' life what it is. A failure. No, Jesus didn't fail because of some mistake he made. The hometown crowd made the decision not to hear him. But Jesus failed in his attempt to get through to them, to get them to embrace his message. Whether he misjudged their receptiveness or it was a doomed effort from the start, I don't know. But I do know this isn't the result Jesus was hoping for. He was stymied in his efforts to do a deed of power there. It was a failure, however you want to define it. Now, if that offends your doctrinal sensitivities, I'm sorry, but here's the way I look at it. If Jesus' humanity was somehow immune from the heartbreak of failure, then Jesus was not truly human, like I am and like you are. Because failure is part and parcel of this human life. When I asked people about failure on Facebook this past week, not one of them said they had never failed at something. I'll never forget looking at my spring quarter report card my junior year in high school, and there it was printed in bold letters that are now seared into my memory. Algebra 2, F. I could blame it on my teacher. I could blame my natural incapacity for mathematics. I could be adult about it and admit that my poor study habits had done me in, but whatever spin I put on it wasn't going to change the situation. I had flunked algebra my spring quarter of my junior year in high school. But that disgrace pales in the face of my first year in college. You are looking, my friends, at probably the only person in the history of Kennesaw Junior College to fail volleyball. It's true. I couldn't pass the skills test at the end of the term, and I flunked volleyball. Other students were failing trigonometry, physics, English literature. I failed volleyball. And the mere fact that I'm up here admitting all this to you is the fact that I've learned two things. One of them is that once you graduate from school, nobody cares what you made in algebra or volleyball. And secondly, failure is a part of life. There are times in our lives when we feel like the biggest loser. Not in the sense of weight loss like the TV show, but in the sense of being a colossal foul-up. There are days when I think I could wreck 5 miles of railroad track with a teaspoon. Now the problem with failure is not its humiliation, embarrassment, and heartache. The problem with failure is our tendency to use failure as a way to avoid more humiliation, embarrassment, and heartache. I failed before, so I'm not going to try again. It didn't go the way I planned, and I'm not suffering that again, and so I'll play it safe from now on. Anthony DeMello tells a story about a sheep that found a hole in the fence surrounding his sheepfold, and he crept through it. And he wandered far away from the fold and got so far away that he didn't know his way back. And then to his horror, he saw a wolf. And with all his strength, he ran and he ran and he ran and he ran until his legs felt like rubber, but still the wolf pursued him. And he was getting closer and closer until finally the shepherd, thank God, had been out looking for the sheep, and he rescued him and carried him lovingly back to the fold. And all of the shepherd's neighbors said, you know, first thing you better do is nail up that hole in the fence. But he didn't do it. He refused to nail up the hole in the fence. And that's where the story ends. DeMello doesn't tell us why the shepherd didn't nail up the hole in the fence. But you and I know why. Because life without the risk of failure is a waste of life. Because you and I learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. Couples who don't take risks in their relationship don't stay together for long. Companies who never risk failure don't stay in business for very long. And churches who tend to be the worst offenders in this regard, churches that don't take chances and risk failure, wind up as dead as leaves on a painted canvas. Jesus didn't see his failure in Nazareth as a way out of his mission, as a reason to throw in the towel. Well, that didn't work, so I'm giving up. No, he saw it as a learning opportunity. In fact, if you look at his instructions to the disciples, as he sent them out 2 by 2 to teach and to heal, you'll see that his instructions were colored by his recent disappointment in his hometown. For example, he told them to travel light. He told them not to be weighted down with stuff that would get in the way of their mission. He said, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts, no extra tunic, just wear sandals and take a staff, that's it. Travel light. Any hiker will tell you that the lighter you can make your backpack, the farther you travel. Now, metaphorically speaking, to travel this pilgrimage of life, you and I need to travel light there too. There are assumptions we'll need to jettison. There are prejudices we'll need to acknowledge and release. There are beliefs we'll need to re-examine and make sure they don't hold us back. Failure, if we are not afraid of it, can show us what needs to be taken along on the trip and what needs to be left behind. Wallace Ford tells about a community that was completely encased in a glass dome. Isn't there a TV program, Under the Dome? I wonder if they got that idea from his story. But anyway, this whole community was encased in a glass dome. Now, the people of the community knew that their lives were greatly limited by that dome, but they also knew that they would die a horrible death on the other side of the dome. Every generation warned the next generation about dire consequences of venturing outside the dome, and so everybody lived as circumspectly as possible so as to keep from being cast on the other side. But one man committed a crime so heinous, so foul, that they could not tolerate the offender in their midst, and the entire community escorted the man to the edge of the dome and pushed him into the ghastly world beyond, and then they all pressed their noses against the glass and watched him die. At first, the man lay on the ground, quivering in fear. But after a few moments, he rolled over, and he looked around. And then, to the amazement of everybody inside the dome, he stood up. And he began dancing and singing and jumping around and shouting. He banged on the outside of the glass. Come out, it's wonderful out here. Lots of room, fresh air, warm sunshine. Well, the people inside the dome were so distressed, they went and got buckets of black paint, and they painted the glass on the inside as high as they could reach so they couldn't see the man out there dancing and singing. And then they all breathed a sigh of relief. Went back to the way things had always been before. If you don't test your beliefs, practices to see if they're serving you well like they have in the past, then you won't take risks and move on. And when you fail, and you will fail, bring closure to that experience and move on. That's the reason behind Jesus' famous instruction to his disciples here in this passage. He said, if any place will not welcome you, and they refuse to hear you, as you leave that place, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. You see, in that day, a good pious Jew, upon returning from a trip to a Gentile country, would shake the dust of that foreign country off of his feet as he was crossing back into Israel, as a way of symbolizing the separation from any clinging entanglements. Jesus tells his followers to do the same thing as they leave any town, Jewish or otherwise, that would not hear them, as a way of bringing closure to their effort. It was Jesus' way of saying, if you fail to get through to one town, if they won't listen to you in one town, then don't keep banging your head against the wall there. Move on to the next town. Shake the dust off your feet and move on. You may have been the biggest loser in that town, but don't beat a dead horse. Bring closure and move on. Or, as I like to say it, never teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig. That's probably a textual gloss somewhere in the text of Matthew. Move on. Learn from the mistake. Make adjustments. Move on. Failure is not a way out. Failure is a way forward. I love the story John Claypool used to tell about his grandfather's plum tree. The old man took a great deal of pride in that tree and the fruit it produced every year. But one night, a terrible storm blew across the farm and snapped that tree like a matchstick. The next morning, as John and his grandfather surveyed the wreckage, John asked, Grandpa, what are you going to do now? And the old man said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick the fruit. I'm going to burn what's left. And then I'm going to plant a new tree. I'm going to pick the fruit that I can, burn the rest, and plant a new tree. Folks, I think it's a safe bet that you will face some big challenges in your life this year. I know for sure we will face some huge challenges in our life together as a church this year. We're going to talk about that in my report at the annual meeting. But the biggest mistake we can make, the way we can make ourselves into the biggest loser this year, is to let the fear of failure hold us back. If we fail, we fail. But who says the grace of God isn't available on the other side of failure? Who says we get one shot and that's all? Who says failure is the front entrance to the cemetery? As long as we are focused on the grace of God and the love of God ahead of us, not the catastrophe behind us, failure will be a way forward, not a way out. We can pick the fruit, we can burn what's left, and we can plant a new tree. I know from time to time you hear me talking about Tony Campolo, who taught for many years at Eastern University in Pennsylvania. What you may not know is that Campolo and his family are the only white members of an African-American church in Philadelphia. They have several ordained clergy on their staff, and even more clergy like Campolo who work in other places, but they're active in the congregation. And so every year They get all those preachers together in one day and have a preach-off. Now, that's not what they call it, but that's what it is. It's a chance for each one of those preachers to deliver a sermon back to back, either for the congregation's edification or their pure entertainment. So on one of those preach-offs, Ken Polo got up and did his thing, and he set the crowd on fire, as he so often does. If you've ever been to an African-American church, you know that they consider the sermon to be a dialogue, not a monologue. And the more response you get from the crowd, the better the sermon is. And the other way works too. The less comment you get from the crowd, the worse the sermon is. And Paulo said he was up there preaching one Sunday and he was dying. They knew he was dying. One of the dear sisters in the back stood up and said, "Help him, Jesus, help him." You know right where you are. But that didn't happen on this day. On this day, Campolo was on. And by the time he finished, the congregation was on their feet, clapping and shouting amen, and doing all of those things that make us Congregationalists avert our eyes and plug our ears. Campolo sat down to the pastor, Reverend Albert Campbell, and he asked, "Do you think you can top that?" Campbell patted Campolo on the knee and said, "Boy." Campolo said, "I really hated when he called me boy." He said, "Boy, you just sit back now, because the old man is about to do you in." So Campbell got up and he started soft. It's Friday, and Jesus' lifeless body is taken down from the cross. But that's Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday. And all the disciples are scattered like scared rabbits, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. After a while like that, his voice began to lift. It's Friday, and Pilate is thinking he got rid of a troublemaker, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. It's Friday, and Satan is strutting around saying, I win, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. And the longer Campbell spoke, the louder and the faster he got. Friday! And Jesus' body is placed in the tomb, and the women weep, and the religious establishment gloats. But that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Friday, and the stone is rolled to the entrance of the tomb, and everybody thinks it's all over, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. And now the crowd was into it, and the amens were flowing, and people were standing up to clap and shout, "Oh, hey, go on." And so Campbell did. Friday. And the poor have lost hope, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. And the sanctuary started to rock, and Campbell was reaching his fever pitch. Friday! And the captives are still in jail, and the cynics say nothing ever changes, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. And Campbell went on and on like that until the crowd started answering him. Friday! And the disciples were cowering in the upper room and jumping at every noise on the street, but that's Friday. And the crowd would shout, "Sunday's coming!" And then the electricity in the room built and built and built until at last Campbell just cried out, "Friday!" And the whole crowd shouted back, "Sunday's coming!" People of God, you have failed miserably at times in your life. And I have failed miserably at times in my life. But that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Yes, we have made mistakes as a church, and we will make more in the future, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Yes, the world tells us we are passé, out of touch, a drain on society, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Yes, the fastest growing religious demographic in this country is none, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Friday, and people tell you it's not worth the risk. That's Friday. Sunday's coming. Friday, and people say it's foolish to rely on God's grace, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Friday, and folks say the best days of First Congregational Church of Elgin are behind us, but that's Friday. Sunday's coming. Friday!